everyone to another episode on The Bridge on US Arab Radio. It's a pleasure to have you back again on the show. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. And we are talking today about a year of corona, conspiracy, and conflict, an unprecedented year 2020, and the spread of disinformation and misinformation. We're going to have a very exciting show today with two excellent guests. The first segment is going to be with Dr. Sofi Ibrahim, who is a lecturer in Johns Hopkins University in infectious diseases and virology. He's also been a researcher with U.S. Army in this area for many, many years. He has a lot of expertise in this particular branch. And we're going to talk about the disinformation and misinformation surrounding coronavirus, the pandemic, the vaccine, and all of the spread of rumors and conspiracy theories around this important topic. And the second segment is going to be about the spread of misinformation and disinformation around politics in 2020, with a special focus on the U.S. elections and the aftermath of the elections with Mike Sexton, the director of the cyber program in Middle East Institute. Let me welcome our first guest, Dr. Sofi Ibrahim. Dr. Sofi, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us in The Bridge.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sahar, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you with us. And I would like to start by saying everybody talks about the year 2020 being an unprecedented year. And of course, we know the obvious, right? We had the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, there's, all the consequences of the pandemic and its aftermath and all of that. But also, what other factors would make you particularly think of 2020 as an unprecedented year from your own point of view?
Well, there are so many events, actually, that are unique to 2020. But when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, you can, mention a few. One of the most obvious is the changes in human behavior worldwide. So there are now more people that are careful about their health and hygiene, and there is less travel than before, which would have impact, of course, on pollution and climate change. And there has also been tremendous technological innovations when it comes to remote working, for example, shopping, dining, and entertainment. And there are many tech companies such as Zoom and DocuSign and Netflix and Uber, DoorDash, and many others that have made significant innovations on their platform to be able to cope with the needs to contain the spread of the virus and people's needs to stay safe at home. There has also been a surge in the use of social media, and especially including politics also. So we've seen, for instance, virtual campaigns increased significantly, and also for the first time we had large millions of voters that sent their ballots by mail. So this, all these have been really unprecedented, and this really significant changes that took place this year. So these are just a few of the unique events that took place in 2020.
Right. So there has been a lot of conspiracy theories that have been spreading around the coronavirus pandemic. A lot of people talking about, the Chinese virus, and maybe China has been trying to somehow benefit out of the spread of this kind of virus or this kind of pandemic. And, all of these conspiracy theories around the origin of the virus, how did it start, where did it start, who was behind it. A lot of that, of course, is based on a lot of fiction and myth rather than scientific facts and evidence. What are the dangers and the threats of spreading these types of conspiracy theories around something as important, as serious, and as timely as the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, clearly, false information can cause tremendous harm. So it can create or can increase xenophobia, which is prevalent in many cases, and it can also create suspicion among people. and this will prevent them from trying to understand the facts, and will also, by doing harm to themselves, they can cause harm to other people as well. So, it's clear, clear-cut rule that misinformation is dangerous, not to the individual, but to the society in general.
Maybe it can also affect even diplomatic relations between countries and political relations between different nations, as we have seen, Trump talking about, for example, the Chinese virus, and the implications can be very dire in terms of racism and political also effects, like you mentioned, xenophobia and others, not to mention, of course, the health consequences of these types of conspiracy theories as well. So if we talk about the general public, who are not necessarily specialists, of course, in epidemiology or viruses or infectious diseases, just the general public, what would be your own advice to them in terms of protecting themselves against some of the harmful side effects and the negative consequences of these types of rumors and conspiracy theories when they spread around the pandemic?
Yes, the most important thing is we have credible sources of information, such as CDC. So, please follow the guidelines of CDC, and that is to, avoid, the guidelines say clearly, avoid large gatherings, wear masks, and wash hands frequently. And we can also avoid or minimize the possibility of getting exposed to infections by shopping online, for example, and having the merchandise delivered, or we can go pick it up at the store. So these are things that we can do not only to help ourselves, but to help our neighbors and the community and the population in general. Follow the guidelines from credible sources of information, such as CDC and some academic institutions such as Johns Hopkins University and also the FDA.
Now, as a scholar of communication, I cannot help but ask about the role of social media and new media in this whole process. What, in your opinion, are some of the pros and cons, the positives and negatives, which are associated with this whole phenomena of spreading information on one hand? When I say information, of course, I mean accurate or credible information, including scientific evidence and scientific information on one hand, and then spreading rumors or conspiracy theory or misinformation on the other hand. What are some of the pros and cons of social media in this particular regard?
Yes, well, there is always a fine line between freedom of speech and information management. And so the social media, the large social media platforms they have to deal with this all the time. During their testimonies, for instance, with Congress, they have indicated that this is an issue and they need to work on it. But some of the pluses is that of sharing information on social media is that we get diverse sources of information, and we also get diverse opinions and ideas. And these are all good things. But some of the minuses are that some people believe the information without verifying them. So they just take it as is without verifying it, and they believe it. And this can be harmful. It can be harmful to them. It can be harmful to other people as well. So, but, as I mentioned earlier, some of the major social media, such as Twitter and Facebook, started to monitor the information and label them appropriately. For example, if they see information that is, fake news or unverified, they label it as such, and that's good. But they admittedly said there is a lot of things that they need to do. With artificial intelligence technology coming up, so this should be more widely applicable to help curtail some of the misinformation that is provided.
Excellent. Now, speaking of that, and in relation to your last point, I have to ask, how can members of the general public also authenticate or validate the information they receive. I've been a member of many different, WhatsApp groups on social media, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Many of us are relying these days on social media and members of different groups and chat groups and WhatsApp groups and you name it. And many of them, of course, are, exchanging all of this information. You can never know how accurate or truthful the information really is. How can we as members of the public authenticate and validate the accuracy and the truthfulness of scientific information about the pandemic and also about the vaccine, for example?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the FDA and CDC and other credible academic institutions here in the U.S., they are excellent resources for such information. Also, if you hear on the public, cable network, televisions, and NPR, public radios, for instance, you hear experts such as Dr. Fauci that is usually, provide the information that's up to date and that is credible and that is really based on science, based on knowledge, rather than based on hearsay and unverifiable information. So rely on, take the reliable sources to heart when you try to validate information from social media.
That's a very good advice. We'll come back to this very interesting discussion with Dr. Sofi Ibrahim right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking about a year of corona, conspiracy, and conflict, disinformation in an unprecedented 2020. My guest is Dr. Sofi Ibrahim, lecturer in Johns Hopkins University in infectious disease and virology, and also has been a researcher with U.S. Army for many years in this field. Dr. Sofi, there are those who are still denying the very existence of the coronavirus pandemic up till this moment, despite all the surge in information and news that has been exchanged in the media and in social media. There are those who are saying, guess what? There is no such thing as the coronavirus pandemic. It simply doesn't exist. It's a myth. We don't believe it. What kind of message or advice do you have for these deniers who deny the very existence of the pandemic in the first place?
Well, I would say again, please read and listen to the news from credible sources and take this situation very seriously before it's too late. There are nearly 300,000 people in the U.S. alone that passed away from this disease, and this number is tremendous. It's more than all Americans who died in World War II. 300,000 people, and by the end of midsummer, this number could easily be increased by 100,000 or more. So there is an average about 2,000 to 3,000 people who die every day. So it's a fact. It's there. So all people have to do is to just read the news and analyze it carefully and see that it's a real threat. And people have to really take it seriously.
You have to take it seriously before it's too late, because some of them, unfortunately, can just take it very lightly, don't even believe in it, and then they can fall victim themselves to this horrible virus, or they can really infect others without even knowing it if they are asymptomatic. Also, in relation to this, there are those who are denying or are skeptical about the vaccine. We know the vaccine has been authorized for emergency usage by the FDA. And there are those who are still skeptical about the vaccine. I'm not going to take the vaccine. I'm scared of it. I don't think it's effective. Or even worse, maybe they're afraid it's going to have horrible side effects and it's going to be really dangerous for them in some way or form. What message do you have for those who are skeptical about the vaccine and are afraid of it, or even maybe spreading disinformation and misinformation about it?
Well, this particular vaccine is actually very safe and effective. And people say that because it was developed so quickly, there has been shortcuts. That's really, not true, because it was developed so quickly because tremendous resources have been dedicated to this project, not only in the U.S. but overseas, in Germany, in England, in Australia, in many other countries in Europe and Asia. So there are, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars were allocated to develop this vaccine. So in terms of safety, it has been demonstrated. It has been tested on tens of thousands of people, and it was found and proven to be safe and effective. There's no question about that. Of course, there's always, when people approve or authorize treatments or vaccines for prevention of serious illnesses, they always have to weigh the benefit and the risk. What is the benefit-risk ratio? And if the benefit outweighs the risk, then they approve. And that's what the FDA is doing right now. Mm-hmm. So, another point that the vaccine is really safe is that, all the presidents of the United States have declared that they are going to take the vaccine live. And also the other heads of state said the same thing, including the Queen of England, for instance. They said they're going to take the vaccine. So that really shows the vaccine is safe. And it's really unlike any other vaccine that has been developed. This is unique. This is the first time for any infectious disease that a messenger RNA vaccine is developed. And so it doesn't have any virus. Doesn't have any virus. And so there's no possibility of reversion or getting infected because the virus exists. And it also doesn't have any additives, such as the other additives that's used for other vaccines. It really all it has is sugar, salts, and lipids in order to protect the vaccine itself and make it more stable during transportation. Because RNA is very fragile molecule, so that these precautions are necessary. But the vaccine is definitely safe. Personally, I would take it when it's available.
This is a very important message for those who are still skeptical about the vaccine when they hear an expert in epidemiology and virology and infectious disease say, I'm going to take it when it's available. That is really very assuring. And my last question to Dr. Sofi is your own aspirations and hopes and dreams for the year 2020. What are you hoping for in 2020?
Well, the most important thing right now is for us all actually is to get over the hump of the COVID-19 pandemic. And after a successful vaccination of large segment of the population, we should be able to get there. And I hope also that the new administration focus on the healthcare issues and affordability and availability of healthcare to all people. It should be a right, not a privilege. Healthcare is a right. In European countries, I lived in Europe, and I know that healthcare is excellent and it's very cheap. Really very affordable. And we can do the same. And also work with our friends and allies in order to prevent potential outbreaks or epidemics or pandemics in the future. Only working with the international community, we will be able to do that, because some disease can happen in a remote part of the world and we don't know about it, and sometimes it's too late. Like what we've seen with the COVID-19, it was too late to figure out that we really have a problem. So, but if we have preemptive resources and approach, global surveillance, effective surveillance, we should be able to do this. And we only can do this with good friends and allies, along the international community.
Absolutely. These are great hopes and dreams and aspirations for the year 2021. We certainly hope that this will be the case. We're going to see more awareness, more correct information, more alliance building, and more collaboration nationally and internationally to try to prevent other, health emergencies or crises from outbreaking. And if, God forbid, they do, we will be better equipped and better prepared to deal with them. Dr. Sofi Ibrahim, lecturer in Johns Hopkins University in infectious disease and virology, and also an expert with the U.S. Army for many years in this field. Thank you so much for joining us in the bridge. Thank you. Take care and stay safe and well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to go for a short commercial break. Stay tuned with us, please. We're going to be back right after the commercial break. Stay tuned.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we are talking today about a year of corona, conspiracy, and conflict. Disinformation and unprecedented 2020. And the second segment of this program is going to talk about political disinformation and misinformation. And with me today is an expert in cybersecurity. Mike Sexton is the director of the cyber program and a fellow in the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the bridge, Mike.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's start by talking about 2020 being an unprecedented year. I think there aren't too many people who are going to argue with that or disagree with the statement. It's indeed an unprecedented year. But aside from the obvious, like the first segment of the program today, I had an expert who was talking about, the coronavirus pandemic and the aftermath and the spread of rumors and conspiracy theories around it and so on. Besides the pandemic, what else, in your own opinion, would make you consider the year 2020 to be an unprecedented year, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one thing that is unprecedented and actually positive about this year is the way that the transition to online work has, I think, helped to realize a lot of what the original dream of the internet was, which was to create this interconnected space that would break down borders around the world and bring us all closer together. So now, because meeting with each other by default is done online rather than in person, physical distance means much less than it did in 2019, just normatively. So in many ways right now, I feel as close to my colleagues and friends in Abu Dhabi or Jerusalem as I do to my friends in New York and San Francisco, even though they are actually much further away, because now it is just as normal for me to talk to them as it is for the friends still here in the United States.
Very interesting. That's a positive side of looking at 2020 being an unprecedented year. I always hear the negative side, but you are giving us, an uplifting, positive side of 2020, which I really appreciate. And I'm sure our audience is going to appreciate as well. Let's talk about this whole phenomenon of spreading political disinformation and misinformation on social media. My first guest was talking about the conspiracy theories around the pandemic and how the spread of coronavirus has also been paralleled by an equal spread in conspiracy theories and rumors and misinformation. There is also this whole flood, if you will, of political misinformation and disinformation. First of all, can you give us an explanation of the difference between these two terms, misinformation and disinformation? How are they different from each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, it's a subtle nuance. Misinformation is essentially ignorance. So to a degree, we're all ignorant. None of us knows everything. So an example of misinformation may be thinking or being afraid that the coronavirus is spread from surfaces like doorknobs or groceries or something. Scientists have actually found that no, practically all transmission comes through the air. And so you don't need to wipe down all of your groceries with a Clorox. That is not actually doing anything for you. That's an example of misinformation. There's no one out there saying on the internet, it's spread from surfaces. You need to use Clorox wipes on your groceries. Disinformation is an active lie that is being spread by someone, whether they have an agenda, whether they believe in a conspiracy theory. So this may be the lie that the coronavirus was cooked up in a lab in China as a bioweapon to hurt the United States competitively. This is a conspiracy theory. It's dangerous and it's unfounded, and it's created with the political intention of making the Chinese government look worse, and trying to rank up tensions between the United States and China. So that's an example of disinformation as opposed to misinformation. Mm-hmm. And I think it would really, we could take days and days to list off all of the different specific ways that this can be harmful. But I think really the primary one is that the basic underpinning of human civilization is our ability to operate and organize around what author Yuval Noah Harari refers to as collective fictions. So things like the law, the government. These are things that you can't touch. It's not a thing in the way that a cat or a water bottle is, that you can verify that exists because you can touch it. They exist because we believe they exist, because we value these institutions as existing. Now, if you have a critical mass of people believing that the government is illegitimate, that the elections are not valid, that actually corrodes the validity of that government, which is at its core a social construct, because the construction is being whittled away at, because socially we are giving it less value and treating it as less valid.
And that really takes me to the second question in a very natural transition, which is really the danger of quote unquote political misinformation and disinformation. Like we saw specifically the case of the US elections, right? Despite, Joe Biden winning by more than 7 million votes, there are still people who believe up till this moment in time that, Donald Trump is the legitimate winner. And they go out in rallies and demonstrations and they say the elections is rigged and all of that stuff. I mean, what is really the danger of political misinformation and disinformation when they just go viral like that?
What is the danger of it, you said?
Yeah.
I think the danger is that this is essentially it's being a little dramatic, but this is kind of like how the fall of Rome took place. It didn't happen like that. It happened over time. Over time, the government was less respected, less recognized. Eventually, it came to mean less and less. And then suddenly, the Byzantines were saying that they were the real Romans, and the Russians were saying that they were the real Romans. Lots of people were claiming this, but no one really took it seriously. And so if we are to have a country where, millions of Americans are just sitting throughout the next 4 years with Joe Biden as president, thinking that this is not a legitimate government. I mean, you have to, some of these people actually have to be employed, I assume, by the government or in the military. I mean, that's extremely dangerous, because that is, the actual institution, the bedrock of the government is being, is corroded.
Absolutely. So like shaking the legitimacy and shaking even the pillars, right, upon which a democracy is built, which is basically this whole belief in democratic transition and the legitimacy of the elections and democratic process. Once you shake some of these basic foundations, it can really have very dramatic and very serious consequences. What would be some of the protections, like for, people in the general public who are not necessarily, cybersecurity experts like yourself, and we're just using social media day in and day out? What would be some of the tips and clues for them to be aware of some of the misinformation and disinformation out there in the world and try to protect themselves from it?
Well, I think the obvious answer is to try to collect your news and your understanding of current events from a variety of sources. Do not just stick to one or two different news sources. Try to get a variety and make sure that they are respected. Newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Something I think is less obvious, but I think would be very helpful is to actually try to seek out news and perspectives that you don't necessarily agree with. Because we humans have a psychological tendency to seek out and value information that tells us what we already believe. In politics, this can be actually quite harmful because it just reinforces the echo chamber kind of dynamic. If I, assume that this political figure is good and their political views are correct, and I just only seek out news that tells me that, and I disvalue anything that might make me disbelieve that, it makes it harder and harder for you to have a conversation with me, because I am dug into like a little bunker mentally. So, I think that it's really valuable to try to find certain, whether it's writers, authors, political commentators, where, you can kind of point to them and say, I don't really agree with them. We have different values, but I trust their reasoning. And I think that they are a valuable contributor, and keeping your ear open to those perspectives.
Absolutely. Like, one of the dangers of social media has been the creation of bubbles or echo chambers on social media, where people just validate their own views and ideas by, hanging out online with people who are similar to them and believe in the same thing. So I really think it's important to kind of counter your own beliefs sometimes. What would be some of the tips and clues and advice you also give to the general public in terms of authenticating or validating the information they have in the political scheme or the political realm? Like, if I really want to make sure, that X, Y, Z happened, that this person was convicted in this case, or the election result is such but not such, or that this person was a corrupt figure, whatever I receive on social media and through all of this flood of information, and sometimes, of course, misinformation and disinformation, as you said, how can we authenticate and validate the accuracy of the information we receive day in and day out?
I mean, I think first and foremost, it's helpful to always be to have a small grain of skepticism with anything that you read online, even if it does come up from a trusted source. Oftentimes, journalists can report on something prematurely. They may be reporting on something that is rumored, that is later shown not to be true. So it's helpful to always, I think, take a step back and root your understanding of the facts by saying, I read this in the New York Times. I read this in this news source, or I saw this in a tweet by this person, to ground things like that instead of necessarily thinking of the things that we consider to be factual as some sort of, like biblical written in the stars kind of fact. The other tip that I really just have that, is something I personally try to do is, if I'm opening Twitter or Facebook or, just flipping through the newspaper and I see, a headline or a tweet or something that, kind of confirms something that I already believe. Let's say it's telling me that, this politician who you don't like, it's a story about them being corrupt. I will like sort of log it in my head and I will say, okay. But if I already believe this, then it is not actually edifying for me to read it. I would rather, if I see something that tells me something where I'm surprised and I say, oh, wow, that I did not expect this, like this political figure who I liked would do something dangerous, or that this person who I didn't like is actually taking a position I agree with. Seek those out and value that information, because that is what is going to actually help you navigate reality without getting stuck in the natural tendency to seek out information that confirms what we believe.
I totally agree with you. We'll come back to this very interesting discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
لكل فرحة وعيد زياد جودة عالية والأصالة شيء أكيد. منتجات زياد من عائلتنا إلى عائلتكم.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about a very important and timely topic, a year of corona, conspiracy, and conflict. Disinformation in unprecedented 2020. We were talking in the first segment of the program about the pandemic and the spread of disinformation and conspiracy theory about the coronavirus and also the vaccine. And in the second segment, we have with us Mike Sexton, the director of the cyber program in Middle East Institute, a cybersecurity expert, talking about political disinformation and misinformation and the dangers around this very important topic. So, Mike, let's talk about social media. You're a cybersecurity expert. We want to talk about social media, right? This very important component of our everyday lives that many of us spend many, many hours with every single day. What are some of the pros and cons, the pluses and minuses of social media when it comes to spreading political information on one hand, or political disinformation and misinformation on the other hand?
Mm-hmm. Well, something that I think is obviously very positive that I know you're very familiar with regard to social media is that it helps give everyone a voice, people who did not necessarily have a voice beforehand. So when it comes to political movements like the Arab Spring or like Occupy Wall Street, you have perspectives of people who, feel like their government does not represent them, who feel that they are economically disenfranchised. And those perspectives are oftentimes not well represented in traditional media, which is inherently, it's a white collar field. It is to a degree, it is an elite class of people. So, your average commentator on MSNBC is not going to necessarily be deeply in touch with, people who have been out of work because factories are closing, in the Midwest, because these are often people who are living in New York City, making six figures a year, doing quite well for themselves. But social media gives those people an ability to have a voice and to speak out and to find common cause with each other, which is obviously an excellent factor in flattening and strengthening everyone's right to free speech. What worries me more so about social media is that when we take so many of our political discussions to be either in this public space or in a semi-public space, I think it makes it harder for us to find common ground. If you and I, one-on-one, in person, privately, are just having a political debate, we'll probably be, I'll be trying to understand what it is that you value, where our disagreements come from, what we might have, in common, be able to agree with. But in social media, where these discussions are inherently, they become spectacles, and we are no longer necessarily incentivized to, see the humanity and the good faith of the people that we are debating with. We want to win. We want to make them look foolish. We want to make them look corrupt and immoral. And I think this is just really it can be very, very toxic. It's something I think a lot of people have a sense of when it comes to Facebook and Twitter, how much how just unpleasant it can be to have political debates on these platforms, because it is inherently meaner than it is if you were just debating something with a friend over coffee.
Absolutely. In my first book, Islam.com, myself and my co-author talked about these two, extremes, the extreme of the shouting matches and boxing matches on social media and the extreme of the echo chambers and the bubbles. Both of them actually exist. What is really missing oftentimes is the middle ground of rational, critical, informative, and constructive dialogue, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And my next question is about the role of social media as gatekeepers. How far or how much can we expect social media giants, like, for example, Facebook and Twitter, to play a role in terms of screening or filtering, flagging, or even blocking some of the flow of dangerous political misinformation and disinformation on social media? Can we expect to have some, effective, constructive mechanisms in place?
I think it's always going to be tricky. If you actually, you get to meet, most of these social media companies are based out of the United States, and tend to really place a high value in freedom of speech. That even if I may be some lunatic who thinks the world is flat, I still have a right to go out and say that the world is flat. And so even though there may be dangers and like questionable value in my spreading that, these people believe that it is not the role of the social media platform to decide what information is valuable or true or should be allowed to be spread. But of course, that can go too far when you have conspiracy theories like Pizzagate and QAnon that start running wild on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Where people start believing really scary and dangerous things, and become more prone to things like violence. Obviously this pendulum swings out of hand. But we've also seen, I think, when it comes to the regulation, the clamping down of, extreme language and such on social media, it also goes too far. Oftentimes, in places like the Middle East, where in the Arabic language, there's obviously a huge variety of different dialects and different, nuances to the meaning of certain words in one country versus another. And oftentimes, in the kind of pursuit to clamp down on Islamic extremism, we remember in like 2014, 15, 16, when ISIS was spreading propaganda on Twitter and Facebook, like very wildly. The companies have sort of overreacted in a bit, and oftentimes people who are just expressing distaste with their parliament or what have you but are using colorful language that is not terrorist or violent at all, end up being censored. And that is obviously harmful. And so I think there's really never going to be an end state where, we've reached the point where there's nothing more to fix. It's not overreaching and it's not too laissez-faire. I think there's always going to be a kind of push and pull to try to find the right balance, which is inherently very, very tricky because, this is a new technology. It's a new world that we live in. I would never have expected Twitter and Facebook to be able to get this all right on the first try.
Absolutely, but there is always hope and there's always room for improvement. For example, we have seen some flagging of some of Donald Trump's tweets, on Twitter, like, Trump would tweet something which is like completely not true, and Twitter would put a flag on this particular tweet. So there is some hope, some light at the end of the tunnel, as they say.
Yeah.
Mike, another question is about algorithms. There are those who talk about, there is this phenomenon of algorithms whereby, something is going to be, happening in cyberspace. I tweet something or I, open a certain page or I click into a certain website, and there's going to be this algorithm, there's going to be this phenomena or mechanism in cyberspace that's going to create a phenomena whereby I'm going to be locked up with a certain group of people who are also clicking on the same links, going to the same websites, using the same content in cyberspace. What are some of the dangers, threats, opportunities, options, possibilities related to this whole phenomena? And can you explain it to our, audience briefly, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, these platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube is another big one, I think, in this space of algorithmic content tailoring. If I open YouTube to go watch some videos, I'm often watching, just educational trivia videos or, maybe something about a video game that I'm playing lately. And so YouTube recognizes that. And then they say, oh, let's give Mike some more educational videos. Let's give Mike some more videos about this video game that are being put out there. Or, perhaps it's on Facebook. I like pictures of cats a lot. So Facebook shows me lots of pictures of cats. And it seems inherently harmless. It makes my experience on the platform better because it's showing me what I want to see. And so I'm having a more rewarding and personalized experience with the platform. That obviously does not necessarily play out so well once that content is political. If I'm looking at political content on YouTube and YouTube says, oh, this is Mike, and he's interested in conspiracy theories. He thinks that the government conspired to shoot John F. Kennedy, or that the moon landing was fake, or that 9/11 was a conspiracy theory, or something crazy like that. Then it will continue giving me more content like that, because it knows that is what will engage me. That is what will keep me on YouTube. That is what will get me to look at more ads. That is what will make me as a consumer more valuable to YouTube. And what it does is it creates a pipeline where someone can be, just innocently interested in whatever political subject this might be. Let's say it's skepticism about feminism. And then YouTube will continue giving them more extreme content that is in lieu of that general perspective until eventually, months later, their own family can't even recognize them because they are flat out misogynists or white supremacists. This plays out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. That's the gist of it is that, these algorithms are designed to push our buttons to give us stuff that we like and that will keep us engaged. And politically, that can be much more dangerous than it is in the traditional sense of just liking cars or cats or food or something like that.
Absolutely. It brings us back full circle to the whole idea of the bubbles and the echo chambers, which can be very dangerous in the realm of political information and even more dangerous in the realm of political misinformation and disinformation. And finally, my last question to you, Mike, is what are your own hopes and aspirations for the year 2021?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I'm very hopeful about is I hope with the new administration and with Joe Biden as just a general political figure to see very often. I don't necessarily agree with Joe Biden on a lot of political issues. But one thing that I think is going to be valuable and refreshing is his sort of instinctive centrism and his instinctive desire to find common ground. Because I think that it really is, it's old fashioned, and I mean that in both a positive and a negative way. I think it is something that is badly needed in the ways that our civilization, when it is online, forces us or pushes us to become more extreme and more secluded intellectually, and more closed off from each other. I think that it will be probably a very positive force to have someone whose instinct is to get people who disagree with each other in a room and try to work it out, find something in common. I think compared to the really divisive impulses of Donald Trump politically, I hope that is something that will, hopefully bring us to a better, more safe and sustainable place politically with one another in 2021.
Absolutely. I certainly hope so too. We had a lot of polarization, division, and fragmentation, which has been unprecedented in the unprecedented year of 2020. So let's hope and pray that moving forward into 2021, we can get over a lot of the conflict and conspiracy and corona, and also the polarization and division that has characterized or mischaracterized our year 2020 in so many ways. Mike Sexton, Director of the Cyber Program in Middle East Institute and cybersecurity expert, thank you so much for joining us on the bridge. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks so much to all our listeners everywhere. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. I wish you all the best as we end the year 2020, the unprecedented year of corona, conflict and conspiracy, disinformation and misinformation. I certainly hope and pray that we're all going to have a fruitful, prosperous, peaceful, calm, and joyful 2021. Thank you. Stay safe and stay well. Goodbye.